Hi, back again. This is my second video on St. Thomas's treatment of human happiness. Again, we're working towards writing this paper about whether philosophy, at least in St. Thomas's mind, could be happiness or whether it's got to be something different. Okay, and so we're trying to get a sense of what St. Thomas believes so that we can at least make some meaningful comments about that in your papers. Like in book 3 of the Consolation, when Lady Philosophy says, well, let's talk about two things when we're talking about happiness. Let's talk about what it is, and let's talk about what it isn't. The same thing happens in St. Thomas's treatment. Question 2, which we'll talk about here, is about what happiness isn't. And then question 3 is more about what happiness is. And that will be the topic of the next video. Okay, so I don't have a lot to say here because I think this covers a lot of ground that Boethius covered. So the kinds of things that Boethius talked about, wealth, fame, fortune, power, these are taken up by St. Thomas, and similar arguments or other arguments of his own are advanced to say how these things, as good as they might be, can't be the ultimate end, can't be the fully satisfying thing. Remember, Boethius says they always come with some problems. And St. Thomas argues many of the same things. They don't fit the bill. Remember, the bill was it has to be one, has to be perfectly satisfying, and it has to be that, the way he would put it, that for which everything else is done. Okay, so you can rule a lot of these out. Nobody does everything they do to get wealthy, but rather they get wealthy to do other things, and so forth. So I'm going to let you read through that in McInerney. I think you can handle that. Let me make a couple comments about things that come near the end that I think are much more relevant to our question, because Socrates would probably agree with all these first things. Okay, so near the end, there's a question in the Summa that says, well, what about a healthy soul? And this is relevant to us because you remember in the Apology, care of the soul is something that Socrates thought was very important, and he castigated the Athenians for not taking care of their soul. Okay, and so here some points are made that are very relevant for us to think about. It's unquestionably right, and he says this on page 25, to give primary emphasis to the spiritual, but not in such a way that we distort the true nature of the spiritual. So there's a nice, interesting point to think about. So there's some agreement with Socrates. It is unquestionably right to give primary emphasis, but not in such a way that we distort the true nature of the spiritual. Did Socrates distort that? So we should not, McInerney continues, come to believe that man's soul is man's end. God is man's end, and man's soul will realize its proper end only in God. So the argument would be, well, God is not your soul. If God is your end, then it can't be your soul. But that's maybe more of a simple argument. This, I think, is getting a little bit more at the reason why happiness is something which resides in the human soul, but the cause of happiness is something outside the soul. Socrates might agree. You might, if you're seeking the truth and wisdom, that is something, is that something outside the soul or something inside the soul? There are some things to think about here. Only finally the unlimited good, which is to say God, is capable of making us happy. So in other words, your soul, even making it as perfect as it can, it's being suggested that still can't make you happy. Okay? Yeah, a couple points. That's the point, right? So the proper end of the will is the good, the unlimited good, and it is only the unlimited good, which is to say God, which is capable of making us happy. So the soul would have to be a limited sort of good. Okay, I'll stop there. Something to think about.